Hi there everyone, it's Joe. Welcome back to my channel. Now that we've had a little bit of time to look at Opus 6 and see all the different kind of cards that are within this set, I wanted to give you guys a bunch of different deck ideas rather than actual deck lists so that you guys had a platform to go off of when the set finally drops, and you know, maybe some of these will give you inspiration for ideas that you may want to develop into your own. I've only got 10 here. I mean, that's quite a lot, but that doesn't cover every card in the set, so if I haven't mentioned a deck list here, then feel free to leave it in the comments. And obviously these are all just ideas, so if you would like me to elaborate on any of these ideas and make full deck lists out of these, then again leave a comment and let me know which one you like the sound of, and then I will develop a more in-depth video for each of them. But for this video I just kind of wanted to get, as I said, give everyone a platform, some ideas of cores and things that I think work really well together, so that you might have something that you might want to go after for when the set actually drops next weekend. And before I actually continue, I did want to mention quickly that I am going to be at Hyper Japan in London this weekend representing Square Enix, to try and introduce more people to the game and try and introduce people to Final Fantasy TCG. We're going to be doing draft tournaments for Opus 6, and we're going to be doing various different demonstrations and deck building classes and stuff like that. So if you guys are around at Hyper Japan this weekend, then by all means come and say hi. It'd be great to meet some of you guys. So without further ado, let's go straight into the deck ideas and see what you guys think. Now the first idea I had is actually technically 3 different ideas, and it's for Earth Fire. Now Earth Fire has never typically done particularly well in the past, but I thought of some really nice synergies that might worm their way into the current meta. And the first one I thought was actually like a monk strategy where you use Mart, who is an FF11 forward, which means that it's searchable by Star Sybil, and you know, being a 6-drop that searches, you kind of want it to be the thing that you bring in with Star Sybil. And the reason I wanted to go with Earth Fire is because Sabin is a monk from Final Fantasy VI, so it means that you get a bit more consistency than having used Edgar, because a lot of people didn't really like Edgar when he dropped, but I think this might be a different way of going about it, in such a way that you actually have a little bit of a counterplate against Ice built in because of Mart's primary effect, which is that your monks can't be dulled by card effects. He can also search for monk backups as well. So there's a lot of kind of give and take with the deck, and I think that that's a really nice synergy. You also have access to Vermilion Bird, let's see, Zuyu, and Hecatoncheir we already had, but we also now have Titan. So I think that that's, I mean, while they're quite expensive cards, you might want to consider the kind of ramifications you have of being able to kind of throw attacks persistently through your summons, and I think that that's a really cool idea. If you throw Graviton in there as well, you can wreak havoc with some of this stuff, and you also can pair all of this stuff up with the removal suite that Fire already has, things like Vivi or Bahamut. Cactuar is obviously something you could add into that now if you wanted to. If you plan on playing like Chaos or Shantotto and have ways of adding other colours into your CP mix that aren't just Earth and Fire, I think it would fit quite well here. And then lastly, I thought Ajido Marigido works really well with Fire because you have access to Phoenix and Bahamut. Phoenix in particular, I mean, we were discussing this on a podcast this morning, but Phoenix is a great target for Ajido Marigido because you're playing a backup, burning something, and grabbing a forward out of your break zone and putting it into place. So you're getting 3 for 1. So you actually get a lot out of that. So that's something I wanted to consider for Fire Earth. There's loads of different ideas that I had for that. And I will leave a link in the description box below as well to the podcast that I was on this morning. Thank you to MogPod Gaming for having me. So I'll leave a link in the description box for that as well. The next idea I had is actually Lightning Water Dragoons. Now Dragoons is something that everybody who kind of plays somewhat casually or even to like a semi-competitive level has wanted Dragoons to do really well for ages, and it's just never happened. However, with some of the cards we've got in this set, there's a chance that it might be getting a lot better. We have Estinian, who is a great boss monster for that deck, and we also have a new Dragoon, which gets more powerful for every Dragoon you have. So I think with the shell of Kain, this is the Dragoon boosting Kain, Freya, Estinian, maybe the new Ricard as well. You could have Minwu in there somewhere, so you could search for it with Ricard, and it's another Dragoon with an EX burst that searches. You have 2 EX burst searchers for you know, the deck core in King of Bermesia and Bran. And then you kind of support it from there. Like, I think it's a nice little core to work off of, so that's something that people may want to consider as well. Maybe Dragoons don't suck anymore, who knows? Now the next one is kind of controversial because it might be really powerful or it might be nothing, but we're talking about Wind Ice here. Now Wind Ice has access to the new Zidane, who is very, very powerful, particularly in combination with Doned, who was in the last set, who can dull or activate monsters, and Gesper, which can dull to have both players discard a card from their hand. Now the combo ends up in a loop where you discard a card through Gesper and then use Doned to activate it, and then Zidane will kick in because your opponent discarded a card. You then untap the Doned, who you then dull to untap or to activate the Gesper, and then you just keep going over and over and over again until your opponent has no hand. And that's a really powerful thought. But obviously you do have to have 3 cards out, one of which was previously unplayed in Doned, so maybe it's too inconsistent to work, maybe it's really overpowered, we don't quite know. But I also think that working Mill into it could potentially be a thing because of the new card Paul, who is exceptionally powerful if he gets a hit or 2 off, and because you have access to things like Spy Sicilian in Wind, and that I think would work really well in a Wind Ice deck because it means your Thaumaturges are more likely to get damage in as well. You have Sid Waff, who can, you know, add to the consistency if you're getting your Spy Sicilians or your Gespers and things like that. So I think that there's a deck there, and I'm sure that loads of people are going to explore this, and I think that it's definitely something that maybe a lot of people want to watch out for, if not build themselves. Now the next one is actually kind of like a revisit of a really old deck that did really well back in Opus 3, and I think that it might be more consistent now than it was then, and it's Water Light. And I think Water Dark could probably work as well. So Water Light used to work in such a way where you would accumulate loads of light forwards, things like Warrior of Light, Zidane, etc, so that you could then use Ultima and you just can persistently board wipe your opponent and you just keep doing it. And then water is obviously used so you have access to things like Moogle, so that you don't end up too cloggy in your hand with loads of these cards. So I think that it would be more consistent now on the basis that Materia exists, because Materia and Cosmos, the problem with a deck like that is that it relies very heavily on Cosmos. So having Materia being a secondary Cosmos that can then search for Cosmos, so you can then, you know, get the ball rolling, you leave yourself a lot less vulnerable to things like backup removal, because if your Cosmos at the time got removed, then you'd end up losing all of your light guys as well. So now that you have 2 of them, that's a lot less likely to happen. And now we have a much wider range of light forwards as well. So you have Wall, Warrior of Light, Zidane, Terra, Hrazvelga. There's plenty of different options for you to try out, so I think that this deck could actually see a bit of a resurgence. Now the next deck I have in mind is more obvious than some of the other picks, and I think that this is like, you know, if you're a big fan of Final Fantasy II, then you'll like this, because it's Windfire, Final Fantasy II Tribal. And I think that because you've got things like Firion and Guy and Maria and Leon, you've got a nice little shell there, and the Emperor, obviously, who's very good anyway. I think you've got a nice little shell there to try something out. I think with Maria, you're probably more likely to want to run the backup, though there's no reason why you couldn't try the forward as well, with her being a rebel and therefore having better synergy with Firion. So I think it's something that you want to explore. You might want to try it like an unblockable build or a hasty build. There's lots of things that Fire and Wind can do together that work really well, but I would try and find ways of adding consistency, searches, that kind of thing into the deck. So Sid from 11 actually helps quite a lot with this, because it can either be a consistency play when you play it, you reveal the top 3 cards of your deck and add one into your hand, or you can make it a blanket power buff. So I think that that's the way that I would go about doing Final Fantasy II. Just be careful of going up against other decks that run FF2 characters like Guy or the Emperor, because your Leon's going to want to switch sides a lot. Now the next deck is a deck I'm actually very excited to play, because I think it's genuinely, you know, on the curve to being actually competitive, and it comes from a starter deck, so it's great to teach new people with, and the Scions, Lightning Earth Scions. I think the addition of Ishtola and Kryl make that deck so much more powerful than it was before, and you could even run a cheeky one of the new Minfilia in there, because once you've used up your other Minfilias, the starter deck one, you could then use the new one to pull them back, and then your searching and your consistency is ridiculous. And Ishtola being a secondary boss monster in the deck to Ida makes it so that you've got power plays as well, and there's no reason to underestimate the fact that Alize gives all of your Scions haste. So your guys get very scary very, very quickly. If you manage to get that magic 5 Scions plus Ishtola out, you're going to be wreaking havoc on your opponent's board. Wall fits into this deck beautifully, because you have Wall and Ida. You know, Wall can deal 3k damage to something that's dull, and then Ida can finish it off. You've now got Ishtola to do the same sort of thing. I just think that the deck looks like it could be genuinely very scary. Another deck that I'm actually quite excited to try out myself is a Lightning Wind deck that incorporates Cypher, Fujin and Raijin, because I think that Cypher's actually very, very good, and in combination with Al Cid, and it kind of slots into that kind of deck anyway, which uses a lot of kind of power reduction, you know, dropping your opponent's guys to a point where they just die. And I think Cypher fits in there really, really nicely, and he's an Al Cid target that potentially has haste and first strike and can drop power and works very well in combination with the damage that Al Cid has already dealt. And then you have Barbaricia, you have Orlando, you have lots of things that kind of fit, or Cactar, lots of things that kind of fit into that deck anyway, so I honestly think that it would be very interesting at least to see how this trio performs in a competitive environment. Now the next deck is interesting because it's not a deck that I would necessarily play, but I thought the idea was very cool, was Water Earth monsters with the addition of some of the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles characters, namely Leo, Chime, and Epitaph. Now Mira we already know is very, very strong through previous experience, and now she has a Searcher in Epitaph. And then Leo, I'm not the biggest fan of Leo, but I think the fact that you could play things like Schrodinger and make it bigger quite quickly is worth noting. And then Chime is a very powerful character if you have Leo out, because a 2-drop that can kind of repeat your Realm or your Gao or something like that while removing guys off the board, I think could be potentially very powerful. But as I said, it's not necessarily a deck that I would play, but you guys might want to explore it more than I would, because I think that it definitely has a bit of potential there. So let me know in the comments below if you quite like the idea of Water Earth monsters using Leo, Chime, and Epitaph. Now this next deck idea is one that I really want to try. I think that it could be nothing or it could be amazing, so I really want to try this out because it involves my favourite card from the set, which is Rinoa, and it's Ice Water Ramp. So basically the idea behind it is that you can use Layla and Viking and Rinoa, well, on said Viking or Lila, so that you can ramp your resources really, really quickly. So you've got 5 backups down as soon as possible, you've got boards to block with, you know, you've got plenty of ways to get as much resources as you can, while still denying your opponent resources through things like Thaumaturge and Argath and Serra and all this, and Lock. You know, that the way that works. You could even incorporate the FF6 engine, including Mog from FF6, which is further draw power, and then your end game ends up being Needhog, which is the 9-drop Dark Guide that removes a card out of random from your opponent's hand and their board. So I thought that, you know, having Rinoa and Needhog pair up really, really nicely together would work very well. And if you pair it with Water, you also get access to things like Scholar, Bismarck, the Leviathan that bounces to put a guy from both card sides. You could really abuse Rinoa and Needhog together while you're denying their resources and like getting chip damages in with like party attacks from Lila and Viking. Stuff like that, I think it would be really cool to see it. So I really think that Rinoa is like the unsung hero of the set, so I'm really interested to see the sorts of things that she can do. And then the last deck that I wanted to kind of mention is Firewater Knights. Now, there aren't very many knights in Fire. The only one is actually Garland, but the new Garland is actually very powerful, and the number of princesses that you can use to trigger his ability to give all of your knights brave, there's actually quite a few of them, and they're all actually quite good. Ovelia is one, which is the power booster for knights, and Cleide is one, who is the princess that activates knights on tap. So I think that like you could easily incorporate a fire removal engine with Water's already very powerful knight engine. You've got Beatrix and Steiner, you've got Agrius, you could run Corilla if you wanted to. There's plenty of really powerful Water knights, so you don't actually need that many of the knights to be in fire, but you'd run Garland anyway because he's very good. And then you could kind of just support it with a fire removal suite, or you could even like incorporate things like Phoenix, because Phoenix can bring back Beatrix, which can then burn something, or you can use the classic Phoenix VV combos. There's loads of things that you can do, and I think that because the princesses are good, you could even try Hilda. You know, Hilda is a princess that draws cards equal to the number of forwards you control, so that's another princess you could try out. I think that there's a lot of potential for that deck, so I would like to see if other people are as interested in it as I am. So that's it for this video, and hopefully, like I said, some of these deck ideas will give you a bit of inspiration for something you may want to try out in the future, with Opus 6 coming out at the end of the week. And as I said previously, I'm actually doing some release drafts at Hyper Japan this weekend, so if you would like to come along and try it, then try the game out or learn a bit more about Opus 6, then by all means come and say hello. And that's it for the video, so thank you very, very much for watching. If you wanted to see any of these videos, you know, kind of extrapolated, you know, built upon, that's probably not the right word, but you know what I mean. If you want to see me like talk more about some of these deck ideas and make a full deck list, then again, sound off in the comments below and let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you want to support the channel further, then please feel free to visit my Patreon page. And I thank you all very, very much for watching again, so I'll speak to you all soon. See you later.